President Trump announcing today that amid his frustration with Russia and Vladimir Putin, he's now supporting a plan to provide weapons, including Patriot missiles, to NATO, which would then be sent to Ukraine. It's a big change of policy after U.S. support for Ukraine appeared to be on shaky ground under the second Trump term. So let's talk about that and more with former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State Joel Rubin up late with me tonight here on the Final Five. Hey, Joel, good to see you again.
You too, Jim.
On your Substack today, and this caught my eye, Trump adopts Joe Biden's Ukraine playbook for now. Is there any daylight at this point between how the Biden administration approached Ukraine and how the Trump administration is approaching it?
Well, you know, it took about 6 months for Donald Trump to recognize that Vladimir Putin would not be working well with him and would not be stopping this war against Ukraine. So if we could roll it back and start on day one, I think there would be consistency. Unfortunately, though, we had a 6-month gap. So making up for that lost time and, of course, all the lives lost, that can never be made up. But I do think there's a lot of similarity now in terms of dealing with NATO, the weapons supply, and the potential for sanctions. Let's just see if this actually gets implemented.
This has been one of those topics, though, that you do have many people on the Republican side with a lot of people on the Democratic side supporting continued assistance to Ukraine as we move ahead. And I know that last week some of that aid was shut off. The president didn't seem to know who made that call, although there were indications that may have come from the Pentagon. Did that alone set back the effort at all?
Ouch. I mean, there were a couple of really embarrassing moments for President Trump. First, of course, being asked about the aid being cut off right next to, when he was sitting next to Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, when he was meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, and Trump didn't seem to know that had happened. And then, of course, these calls for Putin to stop the war. He has nice phone calls privately, and then Putin continues the war. So President Trump, I think he's gotten a little bit embarrassed about all of this. And to your point, there's overwhelming support in Congress for continuing military aid to Ukraine, as well as tougher sanctions on Ukraine. Trump was in many ways an outlier within his own party, and now he's getting aligned with where congressional Republicans have been.
And as we look ahead here, the president has said for a while that he wants a peaceful solution. I think everybody wants a peaceful solution to this. And the fact that Ukraine has hung in as long as they have is a big surprise in and of itself. But that said, do you think that is something the president earnestly wants to see happen? Because I think a lot of people were surprised at the way that he's talking about Putin, considering it was a far different tune 4, 5, 6 years ago.
5, 6, 10 years ago. I mean, this goes back a decade. You know, I still do think that, you know, President Trump, he wants a Russia-U.S. relationship to be renewed and restored, and always did view Ukraine as a speed bump in that process. But now he's beginning to realize that the speed bump has a bit of a deeper drop, and that's called Vladimir Putin in Moscow, and he needs to deal with that too if he wants to get a relationship done, one that's renewed between our two countries. And so, yeah, I do think he wants a peaceful outcome. And quite frankly, that means putting Russia back into a box that he has slowly let it out of over the last 6 months, and trying to make sure Putin understands he cannot achieve his war aims militarily, and he's going to need to settle.
Joel, what's the role that Congress has to play here still?
Yeah. You know, look, Jim, one of the things I'm worried about is that these congressional sanctions were not endorsed by President Trump today. And he's also asking that Congress give him complete waiver authority, which means no real oversight and no pressure to enact those sanctions. So Congress needs to hold the feet to the fire of the president, make sure that he follows up with what he says, get in the game, do the oversight. We need all parts of the American government engaged in this long-term battle.
I want to ask you one more thing before we go, and this goes back to what happened last week at the State Department. You, of course, a veteran of the State Department. A lot was made about more than 1,000 State Department employees who were left. They were clapped out. It was their final day on the job, and I'm curious how you see that changing the dynamic right now at states with a lot of these people who have been there in lockstep with diplomacy and democracy no longer part of this government.
Yeah, Jim, I'm really pleased that you asked about this. Yeah, I began my career as a civil servant at the State Department. I worked in the Clinton administration. I worked in the Bush administration. I came back as a political in the Obama administration. And it's devastating. It's heartbreaking. I've been talking to friends who are there, and people have left, about people crying in the hallways, about expertise being shedded. Just to give you an example, and this question that you have, look, Secretary Rubio was in Asia over the weekend, and while he was there, the office that handles his travel to Asia was literally fired. The Multilateral Affairs Office inside Asia. And that's just one tiny example of the dissonance between these goals of diplomacy and peace and security through our diplomats and the actual implementation of a policy that's firing many of them and that deep expertise, and it's going to really harm the institution and our overall place in the world as a result.
Joel Rubin here on the Final Five. Joel, we appreciate it. Good to see you again. You can check him out on Substack.
Thanks,
It is called The Briefing Book. Take care. We'll see you soon.
Thanks so much.
And we're back after this on the Final Five.